people coming into the chat. Hi, everybody. We're back.
Everyone. This is a really, I guess, a really important Wellness Wednesday. It speaks really closely to my life. We're looking at disparities. We have been looking at disparities around COVID-19 and its relationship to African Americans. And obviously, there's a lot of pre-existing conditions that people are focusing on. But I wanted to introduce, we're going to introduce a couple of people to you. One is, where is Dr. Arta? And Arta is a oncologist. He's also a researcher, very well respected, and a very good friend of mine. He just happens to be also a very good friend that we've invited to kind of talk about how you advocate for yourself. Now, the reason why this is becoming important, but here, should I defer to you to introduce Kimmy before I start?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to also introduce another guest who's also very close to us.
This is my friend Kimmy Sasanya. She's a fellow Portlander and graduate, I must say. Also, she is a family nurse practitioner. Am I echoing?
You are.
That's weird. Let me turn this down a bit. Is it better? Maybe? Okay. A little better? Okay. Yes. So her official title, she's the project director for the Women's Interagency HIV Study, and she's a family nurse practitioner with a specialty in HIV and AIDS. She's been doing that for years with the Montefiore Medical Center in Bronx, New York. She's been doing that 7 years with the current cohort, and overall, she's been a family nurse practitioner for 16 years. So she's done a lot of direct service work, and we're very proud of her and happy she's here with us.
Yes, and she's like family to us through every aspect of our lives, you know, births, everything that's going on. You know, Kimmy kind of has been there. And similarly, Arta has been a very important, I don't want to kill your name, Montajev. Did I say it right? Did I pronounce your name right, Arta?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, can Arta hear?
Arta?
Arta, can you hear?
I can only hear you, Bahia.
What? Again? Okay. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can mute them and unmute them. Okay. What about now? Mom, talk.
Can you hear me? Arta cannot hear me.
This happened last time.
Yeah.
So weird. Okay, let's see what we can do.
What did you do to fix that?
Do you want me to try to disconnect and reconnect? Like
yeah, come back to us, because last time it worked. Yeah. Okay.
So what's important about this?
Now I can
okay,
great. Joy.
So she's trying to pronounce your name. So
Montajev. Did I say it right?
Well, now I can't hear anyone.
I'll tell you what, you know, I thought I was bad.
It's always something.
Now, can you hear? He's still
okay. He's gonna get out. He's gonna get out and come back. Right?
Go out and come back.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me anymore. Anyway.
So part of the reason why we've brought on these two experts is really because a couple of reasons. One, I think that we need to be talking with professionals. We need to be talking with folks who are on the front line. We also need to be talking with folks who have kind of a broad view of things in terms of their knowledge and understanding and their expertise. The reason why this becomes important to me is because Arta Montajev has been a really close friend of my family. And recently, I may have said that I have a family member with COVID that is in, she's still in the hospital right now. I think she's supposed to be transferred. But part of, Arta, can you hear us now?
I can't hear.
He can't hear?
Let's see. Let me see what's happening here. Hold on. Okay, Arta, can you hear us? He went out last time and came back and it worked. So I don't know. Arta, can you hear us? Oh, nope. Okay, let's see. He pushed a button, unpushed a button last time. I don't know what it is.
Maybe you should go inside. Is it like an inside the house thing might be happening? No, because this happened last time, right?
Yeah, hold on a second. Okay. Okay, can you hear me, Arta? Okay. Do you think I should? I
Alone,
don't know.
alone in the world. He's out there alone in the world.
Oh man. Okay, hold on. Let's see. I don't think there's anything I can do about it. Because Tammy, you can hear us, right? Mom, you can hear us. It's Arta's phone. Oh wait, I can hear him moving.
I can hear him moving.
Okay, he's going into the house. Oh, no,
Hello?
Arta, can you hear us? Okay, no. Okay, we'll continue to go. Maybe he'll pop in.
All right. So what happened, just kind of let the audience, listening audience know, what Bahia and I wanted to talk about this session is especially how we have to advocate for ourselves as African Americans as we're dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. We also need to learn how to advocate for ourselves, because this is something that we don't know a lot about, nor do the professionals really know a lot about. But what we do know is that disproportionately Black people are dying. Now, it never occurred to me, this issue of advocating, until the situation arose with my own family member. And I'm not mentioning that family member's name. I have not gotten permission to do that, so I'm not going to. But this particular family member was struggling. I mean, literally, the hospital had said to my family, there's nothing more that we can do. We can keep her comfortable, right? So the moment that happened, of course, for me, I'm like, wait a minute, she's, less than 50 years old, 46 years old. I'm confused. What's going on here? She didn't have pre-existing conditions other than, well, being Black. So I'm trying to understand why this is happening. So I immediately reach out to my friend Arta, because Arta is one of the people that I talk to and consult with on any number of medical issues. And so when I reached out to Arta and I asked him what that meant and why the hospital would have arrived at that conclusion, he asked me a few more questions. Who are we talking about? How old are they? Pre-existing conditions? And he was shocked. He goes, I don't understand. What do you mean? They're going to take her off the ventilator. She's fighting. Let her fight. I mean, that was what he said. Let her fight. And so long story short, I called my family member, the folks that were trying, because remember, this is sight unseen. We can't go into the hospital. We can't go see her. We can't engage with her. We literally are going purely off of whatever is being told to us by these hospital folks. So Arta asks if he could speak directly with the family member, the mother of my family member that is in the hospital. And she was very excited. She goes, oh yeah, please, because there's so much she didn't understand. Well, when Arta got involved, not only did we find out she did not receive the care that they said that they had told the family she had received, the medication they said she had received. Arta discovers all this because the medication wasn't at all ever in the hospital. They didn't have the medicine, so they couldn't have given it to her. He then spoke with my family member and members of the hospital staff, but still the doctors weren't calling him back. And then finally, they kind of clued in that this is another physician that's asking these questions, and very important questions that we didn't know to ask. Well, as a result of Arta's simple involvement, the way my family was treated, calls, all of a sudden phone calls were being returned. People were asking as to the concerns. I kind of put out a concern that we had not seen this family member, and for me, now this may just be me being a DeGru, which is really, it could be my family, but let me tell you something. I'm going to see my family member. Let's be clear about that. Whether I got to send a drone in.
I told you she's going to bring up the drone.
I'm going to bring a drone in. I'm going to, send a laptop. I'm going to eyeball my family member. There's no way you're going to tell me, oh, well, we're doing all we can. We'll keep them comfortable. I don't know if they pushed her off in a hall some way. I don't know where she is, but long story wrapped up. All of a sudden, the level of care that my family received prior to versus when Arta got involved is night and day. In fact, I would say without any hesitation that he saved her life, because at this point, she is now in a rehabilitative situation. She is responding to commands. I mean, they were telling us, hey, go make some preparations. We'll keep her comfortable, So what's the difference here? Well, that's why I want to have both Kimmy and Arta talk about the kinds of things, that questions that need to be asked, who those questions should be asked of. I want to bring them in because they have a different experience in that environment. And I'm just saying, let's be clear. You all know there's no confusion that racism is alive and well. A good percentage of the disparities that people of color and African Americans experience is because of the quality of care and or lack of care that they receive, and or being in environments where that are not conducive to health. And so what we know that's there, but what we never think about when we go to doctors is some of these folks, nurses, staff, whatever, they have their biases, they have their beliefs, and I just don't know how hard they're going to work for someone that they may inherently believe is inferior, and there are too many of you anyway. I don't know. But I've got to err on the side of the folks that are vulnerable. And I'm realizing, wow, thank God for Arta, but everybody doesn't have an Arta or a Kimmy that they can give a phone call to that can get involved. So I want to bring them into this discussion to talk about the fact that, you can't leave your care in the hands of people and then step back and assume that you're going to be getting the best treatment that you deserve. So can you hear us, Arta?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Look how that worked out. So if you could talk a little bit about Arta, about your perspectives on this, because I know you came in, he just said, hey, he volunteered. He says, I will be there, call me, I'll talk to the doctors with you. And he turned out to be a real godsend. So if you could really talk a little bit about your role.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think one is doctors are very busy in general, and B, I think, as you've already pointed out, there's no one who is free from the biases that our society places on us, and I think that becomes a dangerous combination. So I think the key things are to let them know in a respectful way that the person who they're caring for is someone who is cared about, someone who, the family there that's looking out for them, and also to make sure that you're talking to the right person. And so I always, in these situations, try to talk to the person who's making the decisions. And oftentimes, in the way the medical world works, it's someone who's a few levels down from the person making the decisions that's assigned to talk to you. But the problem there becomes that there's miscommunication because it becomes kind of like a game of telephone. So I think you always want to, as much as possible, particularly when it's critical issues, to speak to the person who is in charge of making the decisions. And then I think it's very reasonable to ask questions and to say, I don't understand why this is being done this way. Can you explain this to me? And I think it's also very reasonable to ask for second opinions. And I think any good physician who's doing their job will be open to both of those things, because a big part of our job is to educate the patient and educate the patient's family about what's going on, why we're doing what we're doing. That's called informed consent. You can't really do anything without that. So I think those aspects are all very, very critical. And I think in this particular situation, we just asked some simple questions as to, why decisions are being made a certain way when there are potentially other options out there. And I think in this situation, it becomes more difficult and people are even more vulnerable. A, because as you mentioned, the family can't be there, to ask these questions in person. And B, because there isn't an established standard of care. So you could literally put a patient on a ventilator and have them sit there for 2 weeks, and that is a standard of care because we don't have any drugs that have been proven to work. But I don't think anyone in their right mind would argue that if we have things that potentially could work, and if you've had a patient who's been sitting there for 2 weeks on a ventilator and not improving, that you shouldn't be trying something else. And I think those were really the points that I brought up to the team. To be fair, they were very open to those points. But I think having an advocate is critical, and that advocacy can take a lot of different forms. But I think letting the physicians know that you care, letting them know what the goals of the treatment are, what your goals of the treatment are, and make sure that you all are all on the same page as to regards what the goals of treatment are. And also, when you don't understand something or when something doesn't seem right to you, to ask questions. That's your right as a patient. And any physician who's not willing to take their time to explain these things to you, any physician who gets defensive when you ask for a second opinion, and a lot do, that should raise red flags. Because I think as a physician who understands what their role is, and as a physician who's really trying to do their best for their patients, those things would actually be things that are welcomed, not things that would be frowned upon.
One of the things that you were just talking about, Arta, was around what your goals are for the treatment, right? I don't think people always think about that. What is my goal for, if you're going to do this, my understanding and my belief then is that this is going to happen for my family member. And one of the things that I think, Kemi, if you would speak to the importance of a plan of care. I know we talked about that briefly before, but can you explain what that is and how someone might go about advocating for their family member?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think that the key point here is just to make sure that there's clear communication about what is being done and what the expected outcomes are.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I got involved in this particular situation, it seemed that the expectation was really a palliative expectation.
Right.
And I made it clear that that's not the family's expectation, and nor should it be. This is a young person who has a very reasonable fighting chance, and I understand that the odds are against them, but it's someone who should be given a chance to fight. And thankfully they were given a chance to fight, and things have really turned the corner in this particular situation. That doesn't mean that it will in every situation, obviously, but I think being clear about what those goals are. So I'm a cancer physician, and so this is a discussion that we're very accustomed to having. There are certain patients who we treat where we know that the chances of us curing that patient of their cancer permanently are slim. And so we have to make sure that there's a clear understanding. I'm recommending these particular treatments because I think that they will help lengthen your life. I think they will help improve your quality of life. I think they will help improve pain, but that these treatments are not going to get rid of your cancer forever. There's other situations where obviously we are doing treatments that we think can get rid of the cancer forever. So I think it's having those discussions, I think, are critical, and oftentimes, particularly in situations like are happening with COVID-19, where you have a patient in the ICU, you have an intensive care team that's taking care of that patient, but because of the way that works, it's kind of shift work. So there's different doctors coming on over and over and over again, that there are things that need to be expressed over and over and over again. And I think, sometimes we worry about offending the doctors or annoying the doctors, but ultimately that's okay. If someone's going to be or annoyed by the fact that you're trying to take the best care of your family, that's on them and not on you.
But see, it's easier to say that as a physician and also as a non-Black person. I think it's for you to be able to say, I don't care if I'm annoying you, I deserve this treatment, is going to be very different than someone else doing that. And I was wondering if Kemi can speak to a friend of hers went into the hospital around with a baby, had to have a baby, got diagnosed with COVID and wasn't able to be with the baby. And just the self-advocacy that would have been, even in that situation, Kemi was giving her some feedback on the things that she could have demanded. And it's really difficult because we have a lot of rights that get ignored, and so how do we, and I've seen this in the comments a little bit about, what if we don't have a Dr. Arta? What if we don't have someone who can do those things? And so, I don't know, Kemi, if you can speak to that, just kind of what you were saying about what happened in that process that could have happened differently had there been some advocacy and a plan of care. I don't remember, you were talking about it.
Yeah. Well, to Dr. Arta's point, there is no plan of care for treating COVID, but you can have an advocate in your family member, and everyone needs to have a healthcare proxy. And if you don't know what that is, you can simply Google it. You can go online. You can download this form from your local hospital or the internet. And a healthcare proxy gives someone else authority to make medical decisions on your behalf. For instance, this would have been good to have, Joy, for your cousin who was on a ventilator and could not speak. So everyone needs to have that. You need to have multiple copies of that. One for, yourself. You need to have one for your actual proxy and have a backup for someone else. And you need to actually guide your proxy on what your expectations would be in case you are, unable to speak or, in a near death situation. And so that goes with you to the hospital. And since we're in the COVID area, say for instance, if you are accompanying a family member or loved one to the hospital in the ambulance or you're following behind, you're going to be stopped here in New York. You will be stopped at the door, right? Security will not let you in, but you have the right to request to speak to a social worker. You either need to speak to a patient navigator or a nurse manager. Every floor has one. You need to get their name, their number, and be in communication as their proxy for this, for the patient. And that is how you're able to request, any plan of care, a treatment plan, discharge plan, and what is being done for your patient, for your family member. And by doing that, you need to call every day, right? And so they need to know that someone is watching, right, and being held accountable for what's happening in the hospital, even though you're not able to be there with them. And so, for instance, for my friend, luckily she was able to advocate for herself. Her husband was not there. She was in the labor and delivery ward by herself, and they would not allow her to hold her baby. She wanted to breastfeed. And she had tested positive, but they didn't know if the baby was negative, but there's no real evidence that the COVID will transfer through the breast milk. And so at the end of the day, you're going to discharge this baby home with the mother, and they're going to be in the same house. And so there was that break in, bonding between the mother and child. And so that was a big issue for her. But again, these hospitals, they have their protocols and they follow them. But, for a situation like that, and they also wanted to give her a C-section. So she advocated for herself. No, you're not. I'm not going to have a C-section. We're going to work through this, and I'm going to have a vaginal delivery. So not everyone is able to advocate for themselves. So in that instance, it's a little different because she's not on a vent, but you need to have someone there to advocate for yourself, and that would be your healthcare proxy.
The other thing I was going to say is that part of the this has been such good information to get from you all to be able to kind of put in our own little toolbox if we are facing a situation like this. But also one of the things that we want to talk about briefly is that what self-advocacy is not is cursing out all of the staff, getting yourself
anywhere.
Yeah, it's just,
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when you
remain calm and collected? What happens when you do? You will be escorted out of the hospital.
That's right.
That's what's going to happen.
But the bottom line here is people don't, like, again, I know older people, elders that have said to me they've had operations, and I asked them, they don't know what they took out because they never asked. They just, in other words, you just lay your life out there to the physician and hope for the best. And I think particularly as it relates to COVID and this whole idea that it's almost on the minds of people that Black people are going to die. There's so much in the media, they're going to die anyway. I then have to wonder how much of that is playing into what you even believe can happen with this person that I love. What do you believe about that? Because everyone's saying, well, Black people are dying, Black people are dying. And maybe your assumption is this Black person is going to die. Maybe there's two ventilators, and, these people Black and another person is white. Does that somehow, that bias, conscious or not, come into play around who gets the ventilator? I mean, I don't know. I'm putting this out there because we have a fair amount of evidence that our best interest isn't always what's taken at heart in any number of professions. And I'm going to say, I don't know that it ends at the door of doctors as well. And I was wondering if, and I know Arta, we talked about this before, but as it relates to COVID, some of the questions you asked that I remember members of my family saying, my God, I would have never thought to ask that question. I would have never known to ask that question. So when you came in and assisted my family and basically just asked questions, it really opened up the whole family to what are the kind of questions we should have going into a situation like this.
Do you want me to just clarify kind of the nature of those questions?
What kind of questions?
Yeah. So I think, in this particular situation, we were, referring to someone who was on a ventilator for about 2 weeks by the time I got involved. And again, at that point, as Dr. Joy has already mentioned, a lot of the talk was around kind of palliative care and, there's nothing else we can do. And so the first question that I asked was basically what the patient's condition really is, because we know that there is the respiratory failure that goes along with this disease, but there's also kind of multi-organ failure that can happen as well. So liver failure, kidney failure, strokes, heart damage, et cetera, et cetera. So the first question I asked was really I wanted to assess, is there thought process, does it make sense? So I asked, is there any other evidence of end organ damage? And the answer was no, that all her other organs were functioning perfectly. And so that immediately for me changed. And I think once I asked that for them also, it changed the conversation, because they realized, well, this is someone where if we can fix what's happening in the lungs, they can go on to live a good life. And it's not, I think it would have been a different situation if it was someone who was in liver failure and kidney failure in addition to being on the ventilator, which unfortunately some patients are in that situation. Mm-hmm. So I think this again comes back to the understanding what the goals of care are and having reasonable goals of care. Mm-hmm. And I think that the family had reasonable goals of care, and the medical professionals unfortunately were kind of looking beyond that.
And that's the part
this unfortunate situation.
But that's the part that I think struck me the most, is that humanizing. And I know that sounds strange, but to humanize, the fact that this is a human being. And I mean, she didn't just fall off a truck. She runs a major organization, and she's amazing and loved and beloved in the community. And here these people were saying to her mother, it's like, she's not much older than Bahia. She's not much older than Bahia. Would I just not have my daughter fight? Would I say, oh no, give up on her when there's no other reason? And you got to understand, when a hospital says there's nothing more we can do, that's why I called you, Arta, because I'm going, wait a minute. What are you saying? In other words, I had a family member. I've had family members in comas. I have had family members that were pronounced brain dead. I get that there are varying levels, but it just seemed that they had gotten to that conclusion without answering any of those questions. Right. And I'm thinking, how do you, like right now, I mean, we got a protocol now. I mean, we gonna know how to treat anybody in our family that ends up with COVID moving through. But again, we have to remember, and I want to bring into this discussion. Actually, I talk about this in another setting where I talk about Henrietta Lacks. And Henrietta Lacks, of course, everybody knows, the immortal cells of Henrietta Lacks, and her cells actually became the foundation of virology. People in all of so many other diseases was because of Henrietta Lacks, this Black woman who had this extremely aggressive form of cervical cancer. And I remember when I read the book and, of course, did some research around her, what struck me the most was something that came from her nurse. And I'm saying this deliberately. This is her nurse. This is the person who took care of Henrietta throughout the entire process, from her walking in the door to her autopsy. And she talks about her autopsy report. And she says that when she was in there and they were doing the autopsy, she became very uncomfortable because her eyes were open and she didn't want to look into her eyes. So she diverted her gaze to look at Henrietta's toenails, and they had chipped red toenail polish on them. And I'm telling you this story because I want to get to this human part. And she says, and when she saw those chipped toenails, she stopped and she started to think to herself, imagine her sitting in her bathroom and painting her toenails. And she said, and for that moment, she stopped and said, wow, this is a real person. And all of these cells that we're sending all over the world, these cells of Henrietta's cells, they came from a person, a real person. This is what her nurse is saying in the autopsy, that you, in all that time, you did not see her humanity. In all that time, you did not consider this is a loving, warm, caring human being that was in this shell. It just threw me for a loop. I mean, I know everybody looks at Henrietta Lacks' situation, the fact that the family was so poor and they struggled even this day, and this has been a multi-billion-dollar industry, maybe trillions, as a result of her cells, and yet she didn't have enough money to keep the lights on. It's this part of this that Dr. Joy steps in and leans into and says, what is going on that a Black person comes in and you cannot see their humanity? So given that reality, I need to make sure you see their humanity. I need to make sure that anyone in the space talking about it, calling in and engaging are aware that we're dealing with whole human beings here, because I don't know that I believe that the folks that are working with Black people all over this country right now, their humanity. I don't believe that that's true. And I think, Arta, what you say is right. Kimmy, what you say, calling every day, letting them know that this person matters. Mm-hmm. I think it's sad that we have to make this person matter. But in the case of my family member, it was life and death. And that advocacy made the difference between life and death. And so how many others are there out there? Not Dr. Joy's family. How many other families? How many people walked in alone? Payment alone. What happened to them? And was there an assumption that they weren't someone of value? I don't have the answer to that, but I have to say, based on the data, based on the numbers, I'm going to have to weigh in on the side of, yes, advocate. Y'all laugh. I say, send a drone in. I don't care what has to happen. We need to show up for our people, because we can't be promised that someone else is going to show up for them, even though they've taken an oath.
This makes me think of, and can we remember, we had we used to talk Dr. Apollos in at FIS, and talk about which he said was the word cosa word that means to outsmart your oppressors. And one of the things that I think about also is that, yes, even if I'm Black, I'm going in, I'm calm, I'm collected. If my English isn't perfect, if the clothing doesn't suit what you think, these are all factors. And sometimes the strategy, I don't want anyone to have to try to hide who they are, stop being who they are to be able to deserve to get service. But there are some strategies that you can use. We were advocating for a McDonald's to be built at one point. I remember people were really upset because my aunt was trying to advocate for this McDonald's, and people were trying to advocate for a Starbucks. And all of the community was like, she just wants us to have unhealthy food. And what she was trying to do was create places where the young people could be employed. She's like, Starbucks will hire you if you have pink hair and 5 nose rings, but not necessarily a do-rag and sagging pants, right? These are all counterculture outfits, right? And but you are more employable at McDonald's. They'll still hire you with a do-rag and sagging pants. But I would say that if you show up to a hospital with pink hair and 5 nose rings, you're also going to be given the benefit of the doubt and treated with a little bit more dignity than, say, if you come in with a do-rag and sagging pants, unfortunately. But the fact is that because that we know this, part of it is, for me, is sometimes it's like I think about on the plantation, right before the slave revolt, they're like, we sure got a nice house here, boss. It's like, we're going to do what we got to do before. And sometimes you have to be strategic. If you have someone in your family who feels very confident speaking to people, have that be the advocate.
Point one person.
Right, that person. Think about who it is. Not the person who's willing to get in somebody's face necessarily, but somebody who's a little bit more strategic, and somebody who's, and say we can back them up, but that's going to be the face of the family, because you have to be strategic. We know that there is bias and racism out here. We know that people are going to judge you, how you look, how you speak. This is what's happening to our folks. But when it comes to life and death, I'm going to send, my cousin who's super proper to the door. and I'm not going to be mad. I'm going to send them, and I'm going to tell them what I want to be said, and how I want, and how I'm going to support them in calling every day or what have you. So I think there's so many dynamics, but we do have some control. We do have some things that we can do strategically to navigate this. And it's wonderful to build relationships with folks who have influence, but if you don't have that, to find those people in your family or in your friend circle or your play cousin's dad, somebody who can advocate, for you. Super critical.
So I want the listeners to pay attention to some of the takeaways from this. Is one, wherever you are sheltered in place right now, everybody needs to have a plan. You need to have something where if something does go in a direction I had not intended, what do I have in place? What do I have? Who do I have in place? Again, even everything, insurance or lack thereof, whatever information needs to be had, you need to have that somewhere now. Now we'll get through this. I hope. We don't even know what the new normal is going to look like, but these are the kind of things that I think in the future all of us need to take a look at. And I want I know last time we talked, Arta, you talked about some specifics about COVID, stuff we know, things we don't know about it, that really helped me get a better sense of why it's so hard, what it does to the body, how it reacts and what it's doing, and how that looks different at different points. And if you could talk a little bit about that, because I want people to get some of these takeaways. Obviously, a second opinion is just fine. Making certain you're there every day, so that they know they're going to get that phone call from you or that FaceTime or whatever it is. They need to know that. That's one of the takeaways as well. And to be able to find out who is in charge and making the decisions. So those are things that are real takeaways. And again, if you can't do it, find someone else. The proxy that Keme talked about, that you have to be able to get someone there to advocate. And this is about, I'm really emotional about it because it was scary what happened. It was scary, and it happened so quickly, and it was just haphazard that I just happened to call Arta. I just, it's not happened to, because I call him probably too much for everything. But, and just the whole idea that, and how that, and I want to say to Arta that, my whole family, the way that my family talked about the way you engage with them, we're just so not used to people being kind and without any, arrogance, or listening to every word you say, explaining everything that you're talking about, never feeling offended or by any of those kinds of things. And in fact, just showing up, because Arthur didn't have to. He's sheltered in place too. But he said, no, anytime, no matter what time of night, he said, no matter who it is, I will be there for you. It was life-changing for me, and I wish I could take and replicate you. But you did have a recommendation, Arta, about this whole idea of doctors and advocacy. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two parts to that. One is, hopefully in your care you can find a physician that you trust, and I think that trust is important. But I think that there's a lot of people who, as you mentioned, don't have someone like me that they can turn to, and maybe don't have a physician that's caring for them that they can trust. And so I think some type of advocacy network where people like me who are willing to give a little bit of their time to help others out, I think is key. And I think, sometimes all it takes is a phone call and a 10-minute conversation to understand what's happening better, because when you go to medical school, one of the things they tell you is that you're going to learn a new language. And that's true to an extent, but we don't do a very good job as physicians in terms of translating that language back into something that people who are non-physicians can understand. So sometimes it's as simple as that. It's as simple as just being a translator. Sometimes it is true advocacy where, you're saying, I understand why you're making these decisions, but these decisions aren't in line with this family's values. The family wants doesn't want to be this aggressive. They're more worried about quality of life. Or the family feels that, they want to go down, they want to fight, they want to fight to the end, and they want to do everything that they can. So I think having someone that can have those conversations, and I think as with anything in life, I don't think physicians are, as a group, bad people, but as with any group, there are some bad people within that. There's some bad apples in any group that you look at within our society. But I think we also, as physicians, have been poorly educated on the history of what we've done as a field to people of color, and why there is that inherent suspicion against us. And so I would say, just like not everybody has a Dr. Arta, not every physician has a Dr. Joy to have educated them the way that I've been educated to try to understand this, such that to be frank, when I meet as a cancer doctor, when I meet with a person of color, I do treat them a little bit different, in that I will take actually a little bit more time with that patient, and I will make an extra effort to establish that bond of trust, because I realize that there is, for good reason, an inherent mistrust that wouldn't be there with a patient, let's say, of Caucasian or Asian descent. And so some people might say, well, that's racist, but I think that's just actually I think it's just reading the situation and doing what we're supposed to do as doctors, which is to treat the patient, and no two patients are the same, and understanding someone's history and understanding social situation is part of treating them as a whole patient.
And a quick question that came in. So someone texted me this question. But the question was, can you ask the two of them about the stories that the pandemic is being overblown, numbers are being inflated, doctors are being paid to overdiagnose COVID? Even regular white people are suspicious of the government and the medical industry. So
I can tell you that there is no reason. So I, for example, have continued to work full time because I'm a cancer physician, and as scary as COVID is, there's no way you're going to stop your cancer treatment because you're worried about the coronavirus, right? But having said that, the vast majority of physicians in hospitals have actually taken a huge financial hit because all elective procedures have been cut out. So there's no self-serving purpose to overdiagnose this. If anything, I will say what we do know is that it has been grossly underdiagnosed, both in terms of actually how prevalent it is within the society, and some of the recent studies that have been done looking at people who have antibodies against COVID are showing that. So it's very likely that the numbers that we have who have tested positive are just the number of people who were sick enough to go get tested. And there's probably somewhere in the range of 10-fold that many people who were either not sick enough to get tested, didn't have access to a test, were turned away from a test because they weren't sick enough, or who actually just were completely asymptomatic, because we know some patients have absolutely no symptoms. So I think the actual number of cases we're going to end up finding is at least 10-fold over what we've predicted. The other thing is, I think the number of deaths is also going to end up being much higher than what we think it is, because people who have died in their homes who weren't tested for COVID were not being counted. That has changed more recently, but in the past, patients, unless they actually had a nasal swab diagnosing them with COVID, were not counted. And so when you look at, for example, the numbers in China that say only 3,000 people died, that's 3,000 people who died in the hospital having been tested of COVID. Likely the number is much, much greater than that.
So one of the things that you were talking about, Arta, was the need to develop a group of physicians as advocates, to begin to actually create a group of physicians, like you have, I guess, doctors outside the borders or in the borders or around the borders. How about some doctors that are advocates? Doctors that are there that actually establish themselves as advocates for people who otherwise don't have a voice, right? And what Bahia was saying, I was a kid in school that I needed that fourth the fourth explanation from the teacher. The first time the teacher explained the assignment, I was so nervous I didn't even hear it. By the time she said it the third time, I got part of it and felt enthusiastic that I could do it with what I learned, but I'd need that next piece. And not many people are going to raise their hand that fourth time. Not many students, not many adults. And I was that student. I ended up with 4 degrees, but I raised my hand a lot. And all I'm saying is that in these situations where you feel very intimidated by the white coat, you get intimidated, you think, these people, and we know doctors are going to jail left and right, molesting people, all manner of stuff, because doctors are human beings. But I think anybody, that if you could start, if we could put together even just a list of questions, right? A list of questions that a person should have. They can read them. They don't even or hand it to somebody. Here are the questions that I have. To be able to stop and go, you said that word, like you said a word last night. I didn't know what it was. I said, okay, I'm gonna stop acting like I know what that is. I don't know what that is. Okay. And to be able to not feel ashamed that I don't understand that. Right. I think that, again, people like you, and again, Arta, coming also from another country, from Iran, a totally different experience. Different experience being here, living. There's Kimmy. She came back. We didn't know what happened.
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay.
You can't see us? How
we
weird.
can see you though, so don't pick your nose or anything, because we can see you. But anyway, Arta,
Zoom works much better, by the way.
Oh, good.
Not for this.
So how would you go about trying to develop this group of physicians?
Yeah.
I think that's a good question. I don't know that I fully know the answer to that, but I can tell you it's something that as a field, slowly the medical field is understanding kind of this need for better patient advocacy, particularly when it comes to minorities and people of color. There is now at every medical conference that you go to, I shouldn't say every because I haven't been to everyone, every medical conference that I've been to, there's invariably always a session that is dedicated excuse me, to discrepancies in healthcare. And so it is something that's coming to the forefront. And I think it does require some type of leadership to develop this on a national level. On an institutional level, in general, I think people at our hospital in terms of cancer care know that they can, and oftentimes I'll be referred patients for second opinions. They know that they can send a patient to me when there is some issues there with communication, and that I'll try to kind of, lay things out and take the time to do that. But it does require time. And part of this comes back to some of the shortcomings of our healthcare system in general. The healthcare system doesn't reimburse me in any way, shape, or form for educating a patient, which is unfortunate, because that actually prevents disease.
Right.
Right.
But they only pay for procedures. And so, you have, as with any field, you have people who are in the field to make money.
Right.
I would like to think that in medicine, you have more people than in the average field that are there, less so because of the money and more so because they did this to help people, because it really is, I think, although no physicians are screaming poverty, it really a sacrifice in terms of your time and your family life and all of these things. And so I think that there is a certain dedication to helping people that you have when you go into this field. But, nothing is perfect. No one is perfect. So I do think that this type of advocacy is needed. I think the other thing that is needed in addition to this type of advocacy is better education of physicians as to kind of the history of institutionalized racism, particularly within medical institutions, within this country, so that we can better understand the history of what's happened and try to rectify some of that in our personal interactions with our patients.
Thanks, Arta. Kimmy, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, and I have such respect for Kimmy. We go way back. I feel like she's like, my child, but a big grown up smart child. And I was really very proud of the fact that you leaned into the HIV and AIDS situation before a whole lot of people did, and that you've been there on the ground level. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing, just in terms of your experience in working with people on the ground. What seems to work best when working with scary things that we don't have a lot of answers for?
Scary things such as?
Well, HIV and AIDS, COVID, when you're faced with something that is, life-threatening, and you don't have a lot of resources. You have for many years worked very directly with those folks. And what is it that you've gleaned from that, working with people?
Well, people are still contracting HIV because of poor behavior and decisions and choices that they're making. We do have a lot of great antiretrovirals out on the market that are keeping the disease at bay, and people are living great healthy lives. It's more of a chronic illness than terminal, as it was back in the 80s, 90s, late 80s, early 90s. But I have a lot of young right now. I have a lot of young gay, male, transgender patients that are really engaging in high risk activity, and it's kind of scary. They're also using illegal substances such as methamphetamines. That's really big, and ending up in the hospital fighting for their lives, really, really low white blood cell counts, and dying. Some are dying. And so
Yeah.
it's just kind of like reckless behavior, which is kind
Do
of
you
scary
think
to me.
do you think some of that behavior, and I've been kind of looking at that in other areas, and we all know about what we call invited suicide or victim perpetuated, death by police. There are all these different ideas, but I don't think we have looked at just the mental health piece of this. When I actually explained this situation to Artin. I don't know if I spoke with you about it, Kimmy, but I was talking to a young woman, and she was doing like eyelashes, something. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was eyelashes. That's what she did for a living. And she was talking to me about her sister, and that how her sister had breast cancer. And she was young. I mean, the young woman I was talking to, she was, maybe in her late 20s. And she says, yeah, my sister, she got breast cancer when she was like 30 something. And I said, oh, wow, that's young. And then I asked her if she had herself been tested to see if maybe there was any, she had any genetic. And she said, oh, no, I don't have insurance. And I said, okay. I said, now, but you live in Atlanta, and I know for certain you can get mammograms. And I was, kind of letting her know about some of the programs that are going on there. And she goes, oh, really? I said, yes. I mean, you can definitely get a mammogram. And I'm telling her about this. And then I see this look on her face. Because then the look is, I don't have insurance. Okay, I go and I get this free test, this mammogram, and I find out I have cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Then what? Then what?
Without insurance.
Yeah, without insurance. So I saw it in her face. She didn't say that to me, but I could see the excitement and then the sadness. Because if she found out, then what can I do about it? And it was in that moment that I had to really step back a little bit about, everybody's not moving through this world in the same way. We don't all have the resources. And I just to kind of bring it back around, I said, well, all you can do is the best you can do to take care of yourself, right? And so I just kind of moved it out of that space of fear. It was fear, but then there was paralysis. I'm afraid, but then I could see her paralyzed, and then I realized, that's no way to have to to live. And at the same time, I'm wondering if some of these people are looking out and not really feeling like there's a future for them.
No, it's hopelessness on top of it. It's kind of like I feel like it's like those people who go and they play in the plane tracks, on the train tracks. You know, they're on the train tracks and they're just like, because it's, you know, that's not the right thing to do. You know, it's kind of dangerous. There's some level of living and excitement. It's kind of this endorphin rush of doing this reckless thing that maybe makes you feel alive and not so hopeless, that down feeling. I think when I'm looking at, and I've been having this conversation with a friend of mine, Dr. Labat, and one of the things that she was saying is that she didn't understand how COVID is impacting our community, how reckless people seem to be being, right? I've been seeing you're seeing a lot of footage on things. You see a lot of people running around the streets and going to the mall. And my daughter, you know, showed me some videos of a couple of her classmates are having these little get-togethers. And it's like, why would you do this? And I think, and then you have this kind of, something's going to get us, because there's this feeling like everywhere you go, if it's not the police, if it's not them not going to let me get the job, or I'm not going to get into school, or I'm not, it's like, they're not going to keep me from my people then, right? I'm not going to not live my life because something's going to get you anywhere you go, that kind of feeling. And then there's other people who are like, well, God got me. I'm not going to worry about it. You know,
God knows my heart.
God knows my heart. I'm not even going to worry. And so there's so many dynamics of how we are dealing with the root, which is trauma from the very beginning. It's all trauma. It's trauma because of racism. It's trauma because of what's happening internally in the family breakdown. There's so many ways that we've been traumatized that now it's almost like when you do anything to a little kid or anything for a long period of time, the behavior you start to see is erratic and all over the place. It makes no sense. The mind is all over the place. And so I feel like that's what we're starting to see. People are losing it because they don't know which way to go. There's no grip on reality. There's no sense of what's going to happen in the future. So I'm just going to live for right now.
Yeah, but the other side of that, though, I can just speak from, you know, what I experience here in New York City, and probably, you know, other major metropolitan cities experience this as well. Some of the kids, or they're not kids, but young adults, they feel like they're invincible. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of, you know, programs here that provide free healthcare, free medication, free housing. And so they just don't care, and it's a big party, and so they don't care if they have unprotected sex. I have a patient who is called me up and positive for syphilis, and this is during COVID. And I was like, you know, you're supposed to be social distancing, right? Not providing escort services, but they think that because they're young, they're on medication, and their CD4 count is okay, that they're okay and they're invincible. And it's just a lot of it is lack of knowledge and misinformation. Yeah. So,
and I think, you know, and there are a lot of, Bahia and I, when we started doing this, just our take on things and Wellness Wednesdays, and really trying to provide an outlet for people who are just feeling disconnected, and then also realizing a whole lot of people are still disconnected because of the digital divide. They're not on this, they don't have Facebook, they don't have internet, right? But really trying to do our part wherever we are. And that's something that I would say to put on that list of things that you can do, questions or whatever, is, you know, do what you can where you are. You know, everybody can do something where they are, you know, in the lane that they're in, the people they engage with, whatever that reach is. Like Arta was saying, I mean, he's looking at it from a different vantage point. And I also happen to know that, you know, he really has a spiritual commitment to help and to serve. And many of us do, you know, in various different backgrounds. But I think everybody has something that they can do. They can't just shake their head and go, oh, what a shame. You know, sometimes those words make the difference. You know, I know that, you know, no matter what, you know, whatever I would call Kimmy about something, I always know that Kimmy's going to give it to me straight. And she's going to also reprimand me for doing something I know I shouldn't be doing, right? And I already know that, but I also know that Kimmy has been here for the long haul. For 16 years, she was there. When nobody else showed up for stuff, Kimmy was there. When I had questions, Kimmy was there. And I think that everybody has that space that they can do something in. And I'm saying to the listening audience, and one of the questions I asked about my family member, because they were talking about all of these things. And I said, has anyone thought about her mental, emotional health?
Right.
Mental and emotional health. That's my area, because all of this is being done. She's barely conscious. What is going on in her heart? What is being, I mean, those are the things that I'm wondering about. What is going on in her mind? Is she afraid? What are the questions she can ask? But I think that all of those areas we have to start looking at in terms of our health, our physical health, our behavior, our decisions, our choices, what we're thinking and feeling, what we are even allowing our minds to ruminate about. Even some of the pastimes that we have in, people zoning out on movies, and some of those movies and some of the stuff out there is just really, it's just really horrific, some of it. And so we have to look at all of that and how that's impacting us as whole human beings, trying to figure out a way. But I'm thankful and I'm grateful that we have Kimmy, we have Arta. I would love to see the development of that strategic physicians advocacy thing. I would love to see that, so that people can say you can dial in. A physician will speak to a doctor that you're dealing with if you don't feel like you can. I just really feel like that's needed, and would love to see that happen. So if there are any doctors out there that are paying attention, to look at how we can make that available to people who don't, who aren't able to navigate these spaces, these medical spaces very well.
So if you have any of those resources, send an email to info@joy.degrew. Well, that's how you get it. She does not check these Facebook posts. I swear, you guys, I'm sorry. There's like 1,200 messages. She's never going to respond to you. I'm sorry. She's not ignoring you. She's just never going to go there. So, but we're closing up. We've reached our end of our time. So if each person on this little panel can give one word of encouragement or hope to the people who are watching for this until next time of Wellness Wednesday, please think of one departing thought to leave with everyone on a high note.
I have one. Ask for help. No matter how many times you need it, ask for help.
Okay. I would like to encourage everyone to stay home. Continue with physical distancing, but not social distancing. Reach out to everyone, do your Zoom calls, call your loved ones, even if they're not in the same state, and go on Google and print out that healthcare proxy so you'll have it just in case.
Arta, you want to go?
He's frozen.
Oh, Arta. Okay, Zach? Okay.
I don't know if he's there or not.
Looking at kind of the can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah. Looking at the history of this nation and everything that people of color have been through and have survived, I think it's been faith and family that has enabled your communities to survive everything that you have survived and to thrive, despite having a society that's very much biased against you. And I think that same thing in this situation. So relying on each other in these situations, advocating for each other in these situations. I mean, not everyone's going to have a doctor to advocate for you, but I'll tell you, if I had to pick someone to advocate for me, if I was on a ventilator and I couldn't be a doctor, it would be my sister, because I know that she is going to every day be persistent, be asking people, if a doctor comes into the room and they don't wash their hands, my sister's going to call out, I've been in a room where he's not. And I think, that's okay. So I think being there for each other in these particular times is more important than ever. As a healthcare field, we're trying to also improve what we're doing. We still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you guys. And I will just say, just as you're moving through this next week, to be thinking about one practice you can do every single day that will make you feel in some way at peace. That could be taking a bath, whatever it is, because everything that's going around you is not within necessarily our control, but you can control one thing, even if it's breathing or walking or doing something that gives you a sense of calm and peace. that's where you'll be able to make good decisions out of that space, and where you'll be able to access your creativity, right, to be able to innovate in your own life. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Hope you come back.
Yes,
Thank you for having
yes,
us.
absolutely.
All right. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next week.
That's right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I never know how to get out.
Thank